our Roundhouse, home of the K4 1361 restoration. I am Joe DeFrancesco, the museum's executive director. To my right is Mike Reindl, our lead K4 volunteer, who's been with the project for well over a decade. To my left is Roy Woolidge of FMW Solutions, representing the restoration firm who's been hired to do the work and get us across the finish line. Today's format's going to be conversational in nature. I guess we're going to talk about what we have to say, and then at the end there's going to be some Q&A. So if anyone has questions at that point, which will be clearly stated, there is a mic over there that you can ask your questions. When you think of a project like this, yeah, there's a lot of steam engine projects out there. There's a lot of really cool industrial history programs and museums, and they're cultural in nature because of the people who built. This museum is a museum of culture, really, and the accomplishments of the railroaders who built Altoona. What's seen here in Altoona is also can be seen across the United States and the world. There are countries in Europe and Asia that also are great industrial hubs. Well, the United States has very many of those historic industrial sites as well, but Altoona is probably one of the most premier ones, being the backbone of the Pennsylvania Railroad in terms of workforce, complex, innovation, and development. Altoona was the gold standard of the railroad industry in the 19th and 20th centuries. The K4 is a product of that innovation. Early 1900s, the PRR was undergoing a lot of testing, analyzing, and developing of new motive power. The K4 was one of the premier selections of that development, being born out of the Altoona Test Department. The K4 was the passenger locomotive of the Pacific type. Its counterpart on the freight side was an L1, a Mikado type. In freight and in passenger service, they were the new standard. With these new locomotives came jobs and immigrants, came culture, came, the reflections of the people who founded this town. Mike is a fifth generation railroader of German descent. I am not a railroader, but my ancestors on my father's side came from Italy to America and settled in Altoona to work in the shops. My great-grandfather, when he passed away in the 50s, on his death certificate said he was a machinist helper. And that was the highest ranks Italians would get at that point in time if they were prepared for any amount of time. But I want to turn this over to Mike now to talk about maybe why he was involved, and Roy, and then I'll tell you why I'm involved with all this stuff too. So, Mike?
Thanks, Joe. My involvement with this project, it's about 12 years ago I got involved, and I think a big reason why I got involved with it was how I was brought up. And of course, railroading was in the family like most people from the area. One way, shape, or form had a loved one or a relative that worked for the railroad. And growing up on Dutch Hill, my dad worked for the railroad, but he was always on second trick, so I didn't get to see him a lot. And I grew up with two sisters, and I could only be the Ken doll playing with my sisters for so long. I was fortunate that my grandparents lived at the end of the avenue. So at a very early age, I would go down and spend time with my grandfather, and he worked at East Altoona for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And we would sit down and we would read the books and look at the pictures, and he'd say, this is this particular type of steam engine, this is this type, this one had these issues, so on and so forth. And as I grew up, that was the way we spent time together. And I never thought in a million years that, the railroad, that the one time that I'd be a railroader, which I've been with Norfolk Southern almost 19 years. And I got involved with this project because I made a promise to them that if I ever had a chance to get involved and to see the thing get back together, that I would. And that's a big reason why I'm involved with the project.
What?
My pathway has been a little bit different. So I grew up in Western New York, just outside of Buffalo. And, like any kid, I had a Lionel set around the Christmas tree, and quickly that got boring. And my parents would buy me railroad magazines and went to train shows and got old magazines. And every year we'd make a trip to Florida, and I'd find some obscure place to have them go off the beaten path. And one of those places was Horseshoe Curve. And clearly remember I was probably 6 or 8 years old, dragging them out to Horseshoe Curve. And, my mother's like, this isn't the right way. And it's, all these trees, and this can't be out here. And then, of course, we get there and there's a caboose and there's no steam engine. I'm like, no, it's at the top. My father's like, it's not at the top. I'm like, it is. And so I finally won the battle of going up the hill to see it. That was my first encounter with 1361. So jump ahead probably another, probably 15 years or so, 14 years. And I was a student at St. Bonaventure University in the southern tier of New York. And, there was no internet. There was no mass media, Facebook, anything like that at the time. And heard about the steam engine running down in Altoona. And it's like, we're going on a road trip. So we came down inside and we trips up to, State College and that way and stuff. And then I kind of lost track of it. Did my own thing with my career. I'm a CPA in real life, and was involved with a lot of passenger car restoration, private cars, that kind of stuff. And didn't really think much of it. And about 1.5 years or so ago, the gang at FMW recruited me out of retirement to come help do project management and operations management and some finance stuff. And I'm now part of the team. So I'm more than excited to be here, seeing an old friend. Not quite how I remember it, but seeing it will be one of these days. And looking forward to helping out with it and seeing her back on the high iron.
Well, with each of us have a pathway here, and many of you are probably lifelong followers of the K4 to this project, and I'm no exception to that. When I was a child, my grandfather took a picture of it when it operated on its maiden voyage in 1987, now down near Bald Eagle. Well, this picture was framed and hung in my bedroom. So I grew up with the K4 in my room, while some people have sports cars and maybe NASA stuff or whatever. I had the K4, and my other great grandfather would take me to the track side near the family farm and watch trains. So I just had this organic childhood affinity, for trains, and that developed into loving the history of what Altoona became. And when I was 8 years old, the Master Mechanics building opened as a museum, and to me that was Disney World. Fell in love with it, and it really captured my imagination what Altoona would have been like during the steam era. But I spent a good 20 years of my life, first 20 years of my life, never seeing the K4 in Altoona. And about 2010, it started coming back. This Roundhouse was built. I had, my love for railroading matured, and when I was 15 years old, I got involved here at the museum. That gentleman standing over there with the Frank's Auto Service was my first point of contact. So Frank Givler, who's a board member today and was a board member then, I give him a lot of credit for getting me involved as a volunteer. And, it's a true testament that volunteerism works, because people really love this, preserve history in these organizations. I got to know Frank and Dave Seidel and Dick Charlesworth, and Joe Harilla, and so many more guys. And actually, this through the Horseshoe Curve chapter of the National Railway Historical Society, the Friends group at the museum my involvement got stronger. And there was a member who had a granddaughter, 2011 or 2012 rather. I got introduced to Jordan, who had become my wife. And so it was through the museum, directly or indirectly, I met my wife. So really, this museum's done a lot for me. And when I was in college, I wanted to pursue a degree in history, ran the County Historical Society for 5 years. And through that time, I wanted to get back involved and give back. Museum was in need. Mike and the guys were working here with little to no resources, no cooperation, to be frank.
Yep.
And we wanted to do better for him. The then CEO of Norfolk Southern, Wick Worman, made a site visit to the Juniata shops and got to know Mikey. Mikey is, they call you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you tell that story. But a roundabout way, I got brought back into the fold because of the then chairman of the board, Dr. Andy Mulhall, who's with us here today. And over there beside Frank. I told you I was going to put you on the spot. Got me back involved as curator, and we sized up the organization, identified the needs, and charted a path forward. And 2020 came around, and I was appointed executive director of the organization, and about 3 months into my tenure, COVID hit. So it unleashed a whole bunch of other challenges, which we'll talk about later on, how we overcame those. But I think the real catalyst of this story is really Mike's involvement and how he captured the attention of management at Norfolk Southern, and that's how we got the backers of the project we got today. Mike, tell that story.
Wick story.
The Wick story.
Oh, well, me and a couple other guys from the shop have been working up here for a couple years. And, the position I have down at Juniata is I actually do the emission testing on the locomotives. So I was very fortunate to, when company would come, I would see Wick, I would see Dawn Groff, the board members. And they had known that I had an interest in trains, and our local shop superintendent, I had asked for some stuff for the museum, and I think they kind of caught on that I was involved up here, and not thinking much of it, but one day I'm working and telephone rings and the shop superintendent said, "Hey, how dirty are you?" And I'm like, "Why is that?" He's like, "Well, Wick's here." I'm like, "Yeah, I knew he was coming." And he's like, "Well, he wants to see you." Okay. Like, "Well, it's about the K4, Mike." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So long story short, I go down and there's Wick and talk to him, and he said, "I understand you're helping out up at the Railroaders Museum, and I'd like to take you out to lunch." And I'm like, "Okay." So it was me, Wick, a couple of other individuals, and some of our local management went to lunch. I said where the museum was, the position it was in, and what was going on with the locomotive. We had a good discussion at lunch, and I thought that was pretty much it. But Wick's like, "You don't happen to have keys to over there, do you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I have keys." So I brought him over here, and we went over the engine and the frame and talked about the boiler and, what the project really needed. And from that conversation, he pretty much said that, "Well, I want to get involved. I want to help you, but it isn't going to be overnight," which it wasn't. But that's pretty much how I got Wick's attention. I think I did a pretty good job selling the place. I told him, the reason why I was involved here, and, Altoona is a railroad town, and, I think of, just as I told you about my grandparents, I think that just the loved ones, the town, and the stories of the town, and molding them all together. And, the K4 is really like the last thing that this town really has of any real significance of the PRR and how important it is to get it done. And, things transpired and, here we are today. And we still got a ways to go. It's not going to be an overnight thing, but, we're addressing the things that need to be done and we're moving forward.
Well, and it's like anything else. Anyone here has restored an old house or a car or an automobile. Once you start into things, you discover things that were realized and unrealized. And much like my involvement here as executive director, we did a deep dive on the health of the organization and realized changes need to be made. Wick Mormon came on the board, Bennett Levin came on the board, and they assisted in the restructuring of the organization. And during COVID, we took that time to get back to our mission. Changes were made. We hired staff that reflected that had the ability to have the operations reflect the mission of this organization, which is simply in the name, the Railroaders Memorial Museum. Railroaders, they're people. You think of companies and corporations, you think of numbers and data and analytics and objects. No, railroading is much different. It's people. It's passenger cars. It's locomotive operations. It's repair work. It's overhaul work. It's building. It's taking nothing and making something out of it. And really, during the pandemic, that's what we had. We took the organization and utilized that time as a reset. And Wick became chairman of the board, and Bennett became an officer. We brought Don Grob, the retired vice president mechanical, on board. Mark Ritchie of Curry Rail. Frank stayed on as our, I guess you can say, our historian, our institutional knowledge person, and brought Jason Lamb, the general manager of the Everett Railroad. So if you rode the Everett today, Jason and Alan Maples made that possible. So it's building bridges in the community and the industry, making the museum a much more relevant organization than just a repository. We want to be able to make this a living history organization. While we're all about preservation, we want to be equally as much about education and present and past railroad. So that's where the K4 comes into play. It's really the keystone of what we're doing here, and it's going to be the catalyst to take us to the next chapter of preservation and development in terms of our programming. Over the last 2 years, 2021, we announced the relaunch of the project and the reorganization of that, which we brought in FMW company, which I don't know if you want to talk any about, the history of FMW or
Sure.
Who's who.
Who's who? So FMW started out as a consulting company looking at alternative fuel sources for steam locomotives, industry developments, biofuel, that kind of stuff, and evolved into doing mechanical work, engineering, and consulting. So there's 3 arms to the company. Mechanical by far is the highest profile one that everybody sees. So we're working on locomotives literally all around the country. So everywhere from the West Coast to Nashville, Michigan, Pennsylvania, everywhere in between. And Florida, probably the best known living and working example is US Sugar 148 that we completed the restoration on, and now we actually run the excursion railroad that's down there as part of our business. We have 29 employees now. It started off with 3 partners, Davidson Ward, Shane Mader, and Wolf Fengler. Shane had been a volunteer at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum And when Wick and Norfolk Southern started the 21st Century STEAM program, Shane's full-time job was at Norfolk Southern. He took a leave of absence to oversee the rebuild of the 4501. And through that engagement, he became good friends, obviously, with Wick. And Wick saw and appreciated the worth and hence made the introduction up here to 1361. So Wick's, I think I can share this, Wick's original vision for the 21st Century STEAM program was to have 3 locomotives in the program. First and foremost, the 4501. They did use the 630 for some of it. 611 obviously was the big star of the show. And the third star of the show was going to be the 1361. Unfortunately, Wick didn't stay alive. The timing didn't line up. He was forced to retire from NS. And so that never occurred. So it's still very much in his passion to see it running. And Wick is a good friend of not only this organization, but many other organizations as well. And that's how it essentially started. So,
Well, and with that start, Mike and I were involved with that too, because when you look at a project like this, you want to reestablish the baseline. And that's something, I guess it's really neat because not too many people get to be a part of the very beginnings, but also through it all. A lot of these projects, people come and go, and there's different phases and different consultants and different roles. That's something that I'm very thankful about FMW is that they're really a one-stop shop. So first things first, we had the initial visit with Bennett, Levin, and Wick Mormon, and Shane, Etter, and Davidson Ward, and Wolf Engler, and Mike Reindl. And we met here, and we just, okay, what is K4, right? Got to look at it, figure out what you have, part-wise, physical inventory. Then the next step was, well, okay, we understand the project has a checkered history. What is the checkered part of the history? So we started going through all the documentation, which thank goodness was very thorough from the past efforts with the restoration. And they established, okay, this is good, this isn't good, this needs to be redone, this wasn't done. And the conclusion through all that was that there was more positive than there wasn't. So that was very, very thankful. And then we had to look at the materials. Okay, what's the metallurgy of this widget, of that widget? Is this new material? Is this original fabric? If it's an original fabric, at what point was it put on the locomotive and does it meet standards? So then all the data and analytics pulled together into a summary that was prepared for the Federal Railroad Administration because they were very key in running any sort of rail operation. And again, in the history of the project, we wanted to make sure that we were not only compliant, but exceeded compliance and transparency with the FRA. And they've been very great to work with thus far with their path forward. So if you look at the K4, if you behind the boiler, that was the big question mark. Okay, this is going to be the most complicated part because of the firebox design being bell pair. Not that bell pair fireboxes aren't unheard of. They're very common in Europe, less so stateside. But if you look at the design and the spacing of it, that's where we ran into some challenges. Was safety factor 4, and I'll let Mike define what safety factor 4 is, but bottom line is, as the K4 was originally constructed, it did not meet safety factor of 4.
correct. That is correct. So in 1918, standards were a lot different than they are today. 1918, yeah, it met the standards. It was fine. But if it came off the line as it was built in 1918 today, unfortunately, it wouldn't meet the standards. So that's why the whole engineering process and redesign of certain parts of the firebox had to be done. And through the use of CAD design and so forth, the brackets, the stables, everything, the hangers, everything was redesigned and re-engineered to meet that factor of 4. So even we looked at everything from the thickness of the steel, the interaction of the bolts, and stress tested it all, and it's been modeled and still continues to be refined when we find out little nuances when we did the outside sheets, perfecting that to what's going to be for the inside sheet. So the wrappers are done; they're here. See, there's one's on, one's off for the redesign, but everything is here, and the pieces will start going back together. See, for the outside, and then the measurements, the final measurements, and everything for the inside sheets are, and bolts will start going in later this year.
Right. And, the safety factor for Mike, if you want to explain that, what that means.
Well, basically the boiler design has to be able to withstand 4 times its maximum operating working pressure, which when you do the calculations, it don't meet it. But the main problem on the boiler design was the roof sheet. The thickness and the stable pitch is undersized for 205 pounds of pressure. So basically what you're going to see is a sheet increase, the thickness of the sheets. Instead of 3/8, you're going to see 7/16 and bigger bolts. But we also found there were some issues in that with the throat sheet bolt spacing. There's been issues with the back head braces not meeting the factor of safety. So, that's pretty much main problems with the design. And, that was a big reason why we decided to go with a whole new wrapper too, because if anyone remembers it and what it looked like before, it had been patched so many times. And then when it was at Steamtown, they actually put 2 real big patches on the side sheets. But unfortunately, there were multiple patches, and what you had going on there is your bolt spacing was going all over the place. There were literally bolts, flexible state bolts that would have been on a bind. They wouldn't have been able to flex. And there was just so much warpage in the sheet. So that's a big reason why we decided to go with a whole new wrapper on it.
Right. And other issues have been addressed, such as the steam dome flush patch. That's been completely remediated and fixed. What else has been fixed? We identified some rivets that were too high of tensile.
That was the carbon content. They were structural steel rivets. They weren't meant for a pressure vessel. The carbon content was too much in the rivets.
So they were more or less like structural rivets versus boiler rivets.
Yeah, for like an I-beam. Yes.
And in fact, we just got a new shipment of boiler rivets that are correct tensiled. They just arrived this past week, so
Yes.
that's pretty exciting. That there should be some riveting happening here at some point.
Yeah.
And which Mike graciously sponsored a new rivet oven. So
Can't wait to try it out, Joe.
you're going to put me to work, aren't you?
Yeah.
Good.
Going to be inside the boiler doing it.
Yeah.
Same problem.
Yeah. But it's exciting because, as of last year, all the bad parts or the work that, it was taken off. So the old sheets have been removed. Everything starting last year is a step up, and there shouldn't be, if we can help it, any setbacks that are within our control. I think that's a very modest,
Yeah.
safe way to say, because I want to over project.
And the beauty of it is that everything is taken apart, right? So a lot of times when we start these projects, you go in and it's like, oh, well, we think it might be this, or we think it might be that. And then it's a process of discovery when, oh, by the way, the drivers are out, and oh, by the way, this, by the way. And so, it multiplies, whereas this, it's pretty well set what needs to be done. It's just a matter now of essentially fundraising and timing to get the project completed.
Right. And that's something when we took over here with the project in the museum, is we wanted to promise the community transparency. And last year was a big fundraiser year for us. We had partnered with the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society. They had conducted a matching campaign of $100,000 in total to purchase the new firebox material, which they did in a very short amount of time. It was like November to May. They had raised 50 for members, and then the society itself matched the other 50. So that put us on track to get the material purchased, and then it takes time to fabricate the material, which it was fabricated at your Chattanooga
Correct. Yes.
shops.
Yeah.
And then they were sent in. But these plates, you can see the new roof sheet here, outer wrapper, right? Sitting on the floor, that's all new material. The sheet on the sawhorses, that's all new. The remaining sheet on the firebox, the other side, that's new. The back head was done steam down. So that's an example of something new that was done in the early 2000s that's being still utilized in this current phase. The mud ring, which is the foundation ring on the firebox, is new to the previous efforts. So there's a lot of good new foundation materials that we can build upon, and it's a very costly endeavor. We still need to raise close to $2 million to complete it, but given economy and the way things are, I'm very thankful for the support that we've received so far and the momentum of backing, really, like you guys here today, or general donors, or
The volunteers.
volunteers.
I mean, I've
The
seen
backbone.
a number of these projects, and I would say buying for other volunteers, Mike and his group, and it's amazing, the support, and it's unparalleled to a lot of other organizations. I mean, it's out there in the lead. It's spectacular.
And speaking of volunteers, I encourage anyone
If you want to volunteer,
please
it's the plug.
contact Joe. We can always use more people with things.
Yes. So if you feel that mechanical was something you're up to, Mike will be your gang leader on projects in here in the Roundhouse. If you're just interested in volunteering, just to help out in any way, shape, or form, Brendan Betts, our Director of Operations, will see to it if you're interested in helping in retail, or JP, our maintenance supervisor, if you're interested in helping with anything landscaping or facility support. Curatorial, just let me know, put you to work in the archives. And we also need tour guides. So just like there's John there sitting in the vestibule of the Mountain View. John Fisher was our tour guide today in the Mountain View, so thank you. I wish to thank our volunteers first and foremost for your dedication. The guys I mentioned before from the Horseshoe Curve chapter, they're also very key in our volunteer operations, and continue to serve in any capacity that they can with restoration work here in the Roundhouse. And the staff has been fantastic. We have Mark Frederick back there. He was actually my first admin hire in 2020, and he's doing a fantastic job running the cameras and running content. And Brendan Betts over there, he's one of my newer hires. So from Mark to Brendan and everyone in between, it's been a fantastic journey so far. Let's see, guys, am I missing anything with the project?
Covered it all, Joe.
Okay. Now there's a future of the project too. So let's fast forward as we look here. What's currently working on the boiler, the firebox that is, and we're going to move in the other components beyond
Running gear and valves and stuff was on the horizon for this fall. They've started looking at some of it, pistons, so forth, the steam chest. That's it. Not sure what else is. I think that's the near term stuff.
the drivers might be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the 80-inch drivers back there, we're gonna look at, I think, the quartering of them.
Yeah, he's looking at quartering the drivers and stuff, shipping them off. The binders are gonna be worked on, that's on the near-term horizon. Binders are the parts that hold the driving boxes on the frame. So they're gonna look at those, measure those all up. That's on the September, October, November schedule, whatever you call it.
Right.
A lot of projects.
Right, so what are our biggest needs right now? Volunteerism and financial resources. And if you know folks who maybe can give a little bit more, please point them in our direction. We'd certainly appreciate it. if full funding was in place today, it would be about a 3-year timeline. So just use that as perspective. We have no deadline on the completion of the project, other than it's literally one bolt at a time, funding dependent. But we would really hope to get it done as soon as possible. That is the goal, because once it is complete, then it can be fully utilized. It can be a functioning living history, program.
It's an ambassador for the museum and for the community. It's going to be out in the area, things, and promoting Altoona and the museum.
Right. Tourism is going to be a large, part of the equation here. The economic development opportunities it's at hand. You think, you guys were here. Where'd you have lunch at today? If you came in out of town, where are you staying tonight? Multiply that by maybe 100,000 extra visitors a year. Come see the K4. That's going to be a huge positive impact for the community, let alone the museum, because we have other projects. We have the restoration of the mountain. We have all these other cars that need attention and deserve some TLC, and we want to give it to them. It's part of what we're about. And then there's expansion, but we can't really talk expansion until we get what we have taken care of. And being not only financially responsible, but responsible in preservation. There are a lot of museums out there that take on more than they can handle. And unfortunately, it does nobody any service. The artifact, mission, volunteers. So that's something that we're working very hard here, is to be responsible on all fronts and realistic. So, want to do a little Q&A?
Sure.
All right, let's do some Q&A. If you want to line up behind the mic, you can, or you can just take your turn. So, you guys
Here, probably.
You guys are great too. So if you just want to stand and ask your questions, we'll do the best we can to answer them. So
Once you're done restoration, and the permit is ready to go, what is the plan for operation?
sure. So what are we planning to operate? So we have a number of agreements, some verbal, some in writing. We have an agreement with the Colebrookdale Railroad in the works down in Boyertown to have the K4 visit, which is a suburb of Philadelphia, I believe, down east. We're looking over to spend some time there. Western Maryland Scenic has extended an invitation. And of course, we have very good friends with Wes and company down there who did a fundraiser for us last fall. Today, obviously, the Everett Railroad, I think they'd be very interested in working with us for something. And it really, it's just showing what we can do with the professionals we have involved. I think that will open up a lot of opportunity. The museum is making strides working with the Rail Transportation Engineering program at Penn State. Along with that program, they have an advisory board of rail professionals, rail executives. So I think we're making a lot of friends in a lot of the right places, and we want to maintain those relationships. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Good. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
About what kind of a timeline do you think? If funding tonight goes, it's going now. That this locomotive would be on track.
Well, we're looking about 3 to 4 years. Of course, with steel and boilerplate and specialty items, there was a little bit of a challenge with rivets, for example.
There's currently a big challenge with rivets. It's been at least 8 to 10 months out. The conflict in the Ukraine that's going on is causing a strain on rivet supplies, believe it or not. There was a bridge in Spain, I believe it was, that had some issues being old and needing replacement, being fixed. That put a severe strain on specialty rivets. So it's been a challenge. But that gap is closing, that supply chain issue gap that's going on. But we're looking for a number of projects at rivets, tubes, that kind of stuff. The lead time is a lot longer than would normally expect.
So that's going to be the challenge for us, is being able to fundraise, to have the capital up front, and then work with FMW to get that lead time with materials. So, if anyone has a magic or a golden goose somewhere, please, bring it our direction, because
The winning lottery
the,
numbers would be preferred,
winning
yeah.
water. But the bottom line is as much money we can raise for the project will yield the quickest results. And how it works now is we obtain funding, and then we work with FMW to outline, okay, well, what does $300,000 get us? And then they work up a project estimate and a scope of work, and then they schedule the work in increments. And it's been going fairly smoothly so far, but obviously the more resources we have, we will be able to expand upon that and say, okay, you're here on site until the boiler's complete. That's phase 1, and phase 2 would be running. But the way it's working out now, and it's running pretty smoothly. As Roy had mentioned, other components are being able to be worked on or factored in because they're lower cost items. But the firebox portion is the largest portion of this project, and it's very much like devouring an elephant. You have to take it one bite at a time, and we're taking the biggest bite first. So when this firebox is complete, hopefully within the next few months, give or take, that will conclude the biggest bite, and then we'll just keep on going as support permits.
And I would much rather have our crew come here for 10 days than just have them come for 3 days or 5 days to do bits and pieces. We've scheduled things so that kind of thing works, but once they're comfortable in a place working, like anybody, like to keep them there versus bouncing them around the U.S.
Right. And, you can see some more consistency, and that consistency yields more productivity, which yields better economics across the board. So that's something that's really neat about FMW, is that they really have a good sense of all of it, logistics behind all of it, beyond just doing the actual work, is making it really the best return.
And we do have some local individuals here on a regular basis.
Right. Right. And we have Logan, who's a RTE student at Penn State who works part-time for FMW. So that's another example of that really neat partnership that we have going on. All right. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one.
Go ahead.
My father used to be fireman and engineer on this end, down in Thorndale, Pennsylvania. Is there any way of finding out who actually worked on that engine at all?
That's a good question, isn't it, Mike? I turned to Mike because he has a right.
You mean like did maintenance on it?
Fireman and engineer.
Oh, well, that'd be transportation.
Those records are pretty thin, from what I heard.
I'm sure there's people like with the Technical and Historic Society that would probably be able to answer that question.
A lot of times it's people that have found the logbooks of their relatives. And I know, for example, down in Nashville, we had an individual come out, and their father, son and daughter, who were now in their probably 60s. They had their father's time book, and it clearly showed August 31st, 576 from Chattanooga to Nashville, and the dates and everything. But I'm not sure there's much from the top level, the corporate level down to those kinds of detail records. It's usually kind of thin.
Now, what we would have, we do have the assignment history of where this locomotive was assigned throughout its career. The different terminals, but in terms of the people side of it, it's more the individual keeping those log books. And then by happenstance, a descendant donating it to the museum. And you look through and of over 10,000 locomotives back in the heyday, that's a lot of A lot of men, a lot of crews, a lot of locomotives to keep track of. Any other questions? Yes.
No, I saw the initial announcement of the restoration and talks about having a exhibit train with the locomotive. I don't know if you have anything you could tell me about,
Sure.
like what kind of cars would be seen with the locomotive, if you have them, if you're looking at avenues of, say, getting new cars built, this and that, or whatever, to go with the locomotive. I see you have a couple B60s, I'd assume, for tool cars, or what you call
Sure.
it.
So the question is, what equipment will go with the K4 as it relates to the consist and exhibit cars? So we've had some press releases go out about the acquisition of Pennsylvania Railroad baggage car B60B that came from Ivy City. It was formerly part of Amtrak. The intention is to convert that car into an exhibit car. We have a B60 that was acquired from the Horseshoe Curve chapter of the NRHS, sitting out back here behind the Railway Express Agency refrigerator car. The plans for that is also to become an exhibit car. And then there's several other pieces of head-end equipment. We have RPO, Pennsy RPO, Railway Post Office car that served in the 80s as a tool car, mechanical support car. Plans for that car probably remain relatively in line with keeping it a tool car. Yes. Something else comes up, or maybe head-end power, something thereof. And then the real possibility is, and this is probably the most unique piece of head-end equipment that we have, is another RPO called the Robert E. Hannigan. It's actually the only named RPO car that the PRR had that was named after Postmaster General under Harry Truman. The car was assigned to the Broadway Limited, and the PRR really took pride in these different little PR opportunities, and there were some publications put out on the Hannigan being assigned to the Broadway Limited. The car behind the audience here is the Mountain View, which was the tail car for the Broadway Limited as well. Built in 1949 by Pullman. The idea is to have that car refurbished in the near future so that it can be out traveling, and I like to say earning its keep a little bit, because all these cars cost money and resources and time. But really also that car being an ambassador on tourist lines, and then eventually being available for the K4. We have another passenger car in storage right now in the Roundhouse, in the cold storage area, called the Union League Club. The hopes, it's a heavyweight 1920s. Basically, it's a precursor to the blunt-end observation. It's a solarium car, solarium observation car, and the Pennsylvania Railroad had a number of those cars. They're section cars, so they were not bedroom cars. But the namesake is really unique. It's named after the Union League Club, which has club headquarters in Philadelphia, New York, and Chicago. And it was created by Republicans in the 1860s and 70s who were unionists, who were behind, loyal union supporters during the Civil War era. Presidents, industrialists, and tycoons were a part of this club over the years. So it's really neat that there's some American history in that car's namesake. In terms of passenger cars, in terms of coaches, there are some surviving P70, Pennsy P70 passenger cars that may be available for use as well. So, as indicated in previous releases and conversations, we really want to strive to have an authentic train set to go with the K4. And might I add, the restoration plan calls for it to be returned to its post-1947 appearance, which is the post-war appearance with the as it was in the 80s, with a few backdating details, such as a headlight, just very small things, just to give it that 1947 to 1953 look. I know it's very specific, but that's my goal. Mike gives me his opinions on how he feels about that. So you can tell by his
Whatever
Can't
you
do
want, Joe.
I get that a lot I get that a lot as well, and I think that's a hint that, just get the thing done, we'll worry about the details later. That's all right too. Any other questions?
Plans for an auxiliary tender?
That's a good question. Now, we're very fortunate, with this locomotive, with this K4, that the tender is a 130. The K4 at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania has a 110 tender, meaning it's 130, was 100. Mike, you're the technical guy on this one. It's bigger. It's not quite the long distance tender, but it's not the
It's the better tender.
it's the best tender to have in this situation. So it has good capacity. I'm sure if we were doing some long distance trips, we'd work with FMW be able to source us an auxiliary tender, like the 765 utilized one of the VMT auxiliary tenders, and I think the 611.
Yeah, they've used the Melanin tenders, the Gamma tenders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have, that's what, and in terms of operations, back to that point, I think as it stands right now, we're looking to have a model that's very similar to U.S. Sugar, which is a company in Clewiston, Florida, that has what's the number of that engine?
148.
The 148. How can I forget that? I see it all the time on Facebook. It's a beautiful little Pacific down there that these guys have taken over and restored and then operate on behalf of U.S. Sugar. So there's a lot of tourism, or a lot of tourist railroads in the area that have steam, and I think there's going to be a nice pool of professionals, professional operators, qualified operators, and FMW. I feel very comfortable leading that charge. Any more questions?
Question, when this thing is all done, are they gonna plan any excursions from Altoona to say like east and west?
So
Like.
On the main line?
And, Halloween and, summer
Yeah, it
excursions.
sounds like.
okay, so you're asking if there's going to be any excursions on the main line?
Yeah.
That's very dependent on the railroad, Norfolk Southern, and that all depends on whether or not they can accommodate us. I do know the standard practice right now is to do what's called ferry moves over the line, so which I don't foresee, unless something would change. I don't see any challenge with that. Where we would have to make arrangements. They'd bring down a pilot unit, diesel put on the front, and then excursions. Excursions would be either over short lines or regional lines, either with Amtrak support, because if you're accessing an Amtrak station, Amtrak gets involved with that, or if you're down east like SEPTA or MARC or New Jersey Transit, there would be inclusion with them and discussions. But it's going to take a lot of partnerships to make that kind of thing happen. But the standard practice is, and there's precedent that if we need to go somewhere, there is a way to get there from point A to point B. But the bottom line is that we want to be as minimal of an inconvenience to the Class 1 as possible. And as I said earlier about FRA compliance, we want to exceed as much as we can. If we don't meet it, exceed it, because reliability and professionalism is going to be the key to the operational side of the future of this locomotive. Any other questions?
Did it go in?
57.
So the question was, when was it put on display at Horseshoe Curve? And that was in 1957, where it remained until 1985. Yep. That's right. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
As far as volunteer work, who is the point of contact?
So I will be the point of contact for volunteerism, for volunteering on the project or the museum. I have a business card that you can grab over at the museum gift shop.
Okay,
and then you can email me or leave me a voicemail, and
okay.
we'll get you signed up. And the process for volunteering on the project moving forward will be mimicked much like Nashville Steam Preservation Society with the Shane Meadows project. You know, in order to volunteer, we ask that you become a member of the museum, and then there will be a orientation session where Mike and I, and maybe a member of the FMW team will, you know, bring you in, see what your qualifications are and your skill set. Because, you know, what's the old slogan for the railroad? Safety first and always. So we want everybody to be safe. And if you're being safe, we're going to have a good time. So, all right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Will it remain coal-fired or oil?
So the question is, will we remain coal-fired or oil? Yes, that's the answer. There are challenges, I know, with the coal market and coal supply. But much like the Nashville Steam Program, our intention is full steam ahead with coal. If we run into any issues, there are solutions to overcome that with conversion to oil if we had to. Yes, sir.
You know, probably being paid asking always questions.
No, that's good.
But
Keep everyone awake, right?
now the water supply for the K4,
Water supply?
yeah, you know, steam. If you come up with, I mean, probably not now, but come up with kind of a plan where get access more water for the steam engine.
Sure. We have water on the facility here. There's usually additives, right? Correct?
Yeah, yep. There's anti-foaming, anti-corrosion, corrosive agents. It's water treatment. It helps, right? So your boiler and that isn't scaling.
And that would be the standard practice. Like if we're out traveling for water sources, no matter what that treatment would be added to ensure there would not be any foaming or corrosive natures to it.
And and it's part of, like, usually it's part of the longer distance trips if you take the dog and pony show on the road. A lot of times there's pre-planning logistics where you contact the water departments, fire departments, and so forth, and they have regular water reports to tell you what the condition is, the pH levels and all that stuff. So you can stock up on how many gallons of additive that you need to control whatever the thing is. And if, you know, I spent 8 years with Canadian Pacific with their steam engine that's just about to come out on the road again. And I can tell you, going across the prairies of Canada, the water comes out in chunks. It's not, it's very, very hard. So you don't expect some of this stuff, and it's always a surprise, but try to plan as much as you can and where you're going to take water and where you're going to avoid taking water.
Yes.
You still planning on converting everything to roller bearings?
So the question is, are we going to convert everything to roller bearing? The jury is still out, is the correct answer to that. There are accepted practices of oil-fed lubrication.
As it stands right now, the journal boxes have already been rebuilt. They were converted to run oil. And a big reason for that is because you can't get the high-tech skate grease anymore. And just like all the other chemicals today, they took a lot of the volatiles out of it. What you'll probably see early on would be running on oil, but with force-fed lubrication on the boxes.
And that's a much more common application for.
Yeah, even smaller railroads that still use the grease, they've even tried using crater grease, like what we use in traction motors today. Above 30 mile an hour, they're starting to get hot. So.
The Southern Pacific 4449, the daylight, is force oil. Let's see, what's another good example? That's probably one of the best mainline examples of that. And with Doyle McCormick, you know, being CMO over that, it's, to my knowledge, it's a great setup.
2016 process. And grease to oil, yeah.
So from grease to oil, 4501 is set up the same way. So that's where Shane Matter's background with converting it from grease to oil. It'll be the same application. I'm fairly certain of this. However, the Pennsy did have several, maybe not more than 5, right?
Yeah.
K4s that were converted to roller bearing, but they were done to later produced locomotives, so like in I think the 1920s. The Bell
Somewhere in there. I think you would, not looking, I haven't looked at it very heavily, but I think that you would be getting into the machine in the pedestal clause, and then you figure you're gonna have all that recast, and have to look at the axles different, so on and so forth. I mean, I'm not questioning the supremacy of roller bearings. I mean, they're a great thing. I think down the road, maybe we could look at that, but I think where we're going with it right now is that we'll be totally fine.
Yep, we're on the right track. So,
It's fairly significant cost.
right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you look at a project that's already, approximately 2.4 million dollars, 2.3 or 2.4 million dollars. Not to use how I said that. You'd be adding several 6 figures, mid 6 figure range to that budget. So we certainly want to get the locomotive complete. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Color gonna be,
What color?
yes,
What color do you want it to be?
black.
Black. Now, not black.
Well,
It's going to be dark green locomotive enamel. So it's slightly
That's better than,
green.
that's better than.
Drop a green in a big bucket of black. That's basically it. And one thing we are going to do, I'm all about the details, right? Aesthetics. The cab roof, if you look at the cab over here, you have no, not Tuscan red. The cab roof from the water line mic or the drip edge. The drip edge up is going to be one part freight car, 1940s freight car color to one part DGLE, which is the dark green locomotive enamel. So it's 50-50. And then the tender deck is going to be freight car color. So that's the appropriate, after a locomotive was rebuilt, that's the appropriate color scheme. So it's the Pennsy. It's Pennsy-fied. So, and then we're hoping to do gold leaf lettering on the tender and the cab. So.
Yeah, the Keystone ones, right?
Oh, yeah. Right here. So any other questions? All right. If we're going to wrap this up then, again, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today. Some great questions. I appreciate you coming and lending an ear for us to fill, let's put it that way. But there are still refreshments out back there. Please stop around. I'm going to put Mike on the spot here, but Mike is probably one of the most knowledgeable person on this locomotive in the room. So if you have questions, I'm sure he'll be happy to show you a thing or two and converse more about it.
A couple things, yeah.
I will be around, and Roy will be here too. And what a beautiful day in May. So welcome, and the museum will be open till 7 tonight. So feel free to spend as much time in the Roundhouse as you like, and then head over and walk through the museum. John is here, and some of the volunteers. So if you want to go through the mountain view, if you haven't had a chance to, please walk through. And also feel free to walk around the turntable and take a look at the rolling stock. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.